At 5:38 on a Thursday morning, my daughter was hammering on my front door hard enough to shake the glass beside it. "Dad, open this door. You need to turn it back on right now," Elise shouted. I was 68 years old, barefoot, wearing flannel pajama pants, and holding a mug of coffee I had poured less than 2 minutes earlier. Through the narrow window beside the door, I could see my son-in-law Grant pacing behind her with his phone pressed to his ear. He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't asking whether I was sick, or whether something had happened during the night. He kept staring at the screen and saying, "Tell him the payment is due today." I unlocked the deadbolt but left the chain in place. "What payment?" I asked. Elise shoved her face toward the opening. "Don't do that, Dad. The credit line is frozen. Fix it." My hand stayed on the door. 9 days earlier, I had revoked the financial power of attorney I had given my daughter after heart surgery 3 years before. I had also frozen a line of credit secured against one of my rental properties, moved every legitimate rental deposit into a new bank, and left exactly $73 in the old operating account. I hadn't told Elise or Grant any of it. As far as they knew, I had no idea the credit line existed. That was why hearing my daughter demand that I turn it back on before 6 in the morning made the last piece fall into place. "How do you know it's frozen?" I asked. Elise stopped pounding. Grant lowered his phone. For about 2 seconds, neither of them said anything. Then Grant stepped forward. "Sam, this isn't the time to play games. Our mortgage drafts this morning. The transfer failed." I looked at the man who had married my only daughter 12 years earlier and asked the simplest question I could think of. "Why is your mortgage being paid from a credit line against my building?" His face changed. "Not much, but enough." Elise grabbed the door and pulled against the chain. "Because you said you'd help us." "I said I'd help with Owen's school when you were short last fall. I didn't say you could borrow against my property." "It's all family," she snapped. "That building is going to be mine eventually." The sentence landed between us like a brick. Behind them, the motion light over my porch clicked off because we had been standing still too long. I reached up and switched it back on from inside. That was when Grant noticed the camera tucked beneath the porch beam. His eyes lifted toward it, then moved quickly back to me. "You're recording this?" he asked. The porch records movement. Elise turned toward him. "Grant, stop talking." That was the first moment I knew they had discussed what they would say before they came. I started closing the door, but Grant shoved his shoulder against it. The chain snapped tight. "You can't just cut us off with no warning," he said. "Watch me." He pushed harder. The screws in the chain plate groaned against the wood. I stepped back and reached for my phone. "Get away from my door." Elise's voice broke into something between anger and panic. "Dad, please. The bank will mark us late. We already missed one payment last month. If this bounces, Grant's business line gets reviewed too." That was new information, but I didn't ask about it. I had spent 37 years working for the county assessor's office, measuring parcels, reviewing deeds, and explaining to angry neighbors that a property line didn't move just because someone had treated the other side like it belonged to them. I knew better than to argue when people were frightened enough to start volunteering facts. Grant hit the door once with the heel of his hand. "You have plenty of equity. We're talking about one payment. Then why did you need $68,000? His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Elise went completely still. I watched her understand that I knew more than they had expected. "Dad," she said quietly, "where did you get that number?" I looked at my daughter, the girl whose bicycle I had run behind until she learned to balance, the young woman whose hand I held when her mother died, and the person standing on my porch before sunrise, because money she believed she could reach had suddenly stopped moving. "From the lien recorded against my duplex," I said. "The lien neither of you thought I would see." Grant stepped back first. Elise stared at me as though I had become someone she didn't recognize. Then she said, "You're going to ruin us over a building you don't even need." I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and called the detective whose card had been sitting beside my coffee since the previous afternoon. 9 days earlier, I had been standing at the counter of a hardware store when my phone buzzed with an email from the Franklin County Recorder's office. The subject line read, "Property Fraud Alert." I had enrolled in the alert system the year before because, after nearly 4 decades around deeds and assessments, I knew enough to understand that boring paperwork could destroy a person faster than a dramatic argument ever would. Most alerts were nothing. A mortgage release, a utility easement, a corrected legal description. This one showed a new security interest recorded against a brick duplex I owned on East Dunbar Street, a 2-unit place. Linda and I had bought in 1998, with money we had saved for 14 years. The lien referenced a revolving credit agreement with a maximum balance of $68,000. I stood there between plumbing fittings and lawn fertilizer reading the number twice. I had no revolving credit line on Dunbar Street. I hadn't borrowed against that property since paying off the original mortgage 6 years earlier. I drove straight home without buying the faucet cartridge I had gone there for. My name is Samuel Rourke, though everyone in my family has called me Sam since I was a boy. I retired at 65 after 37 years with the county, most of them as a senior residential assessor. I wasn't wealthy, but Linda and I had been careful. We owned our house free and clear, the Dunbar duplex, and a small 3-bedroom rental near Worthington that provided enough income to supplement my pension. Linda had been a public school librarian. When she died from ovarian cancer 5 years before this happened, she left me with a house that suddenly sounded too quiet, and one instruction I kept hearing in my head, whenever I considered doing something foolish: don't make decisions just because you're lonely. Elise was our only child. She was 40, a dental office manager, married to Grant Keller, who ran a small commercial flooring company. Their son Owen was 11. I loved that boy enough to make bad judgment feel noble if I wasn't careful. And Elise knew it. That didn't mean I thought she was stealing from me. Until the fraud alert arrived, I would have told anyone my daughter was disorganized with money, too quick to upgrade cars, and married to a man who treated every good month as proof that the next 12 would be even better. But dishonest? No. 3 years earlier, when I had emergency bypass surgery, my attorney had prepared a durable financial power of attorney naming Elise so she could handle bills if I came out of surgery unable to manage my affairs. I recovered faster than expected. 2 weeks later, I was walking around the block. And 6 weeks after that, I was driving again. I never revoked the document because I viewed it as emergency equipment, like a fire extinguisher hanging in the garage. You don't throw away an extinguisher because the fire never happened. My mistake wasn't forgetting the document existed. My mistake was assuming my daughter understood the difference between permission held for an emergency and permission to redesign my life. The afternoon the fraud alert arrived, I pulled the recorded lien from the county website, printed it, and read every page. The lender was a regional finance company I had never used. The borrower was listed as the Samuel Rourke Living Trust, even though I had never pledged the trust's property for that loan. Attached to the filing was a certification signed by an attorney in fact. Elise Rourke Keller, my daughter. Beside her name was a reference to the power of attorney I had signed before surgery. I did not call her. That decision probably saved the case. Instead, I called Martin Doyle, the attorney who had prepared the document. He listened without interrupting, then asked me to email him the filing. 20 minutes later, he called back and said, "Sam, your power of attorney is broad enough that a lender might have relied on it, but there are restrictions on self-dealing. Did you authorize Elise to pledge the duplex for her benefit?" "No." "Did you receive the loan proceeds?" "Not that I know of." "Then don't confront anyone. Come to my office." By 4 that afternoon, Martin had already contacted the lender's fraud department. Their representative would not give us everything immediately, but she confirmed the line had been opened 14 months earlier, and that advances had been taken repeatedly. The current balance was $57,840. The first draw had been $8,500, then $4,200, then $3,100. After that came a series of transfers that looked almost monthly. Martin asked where the money had gone. The fraud representative said the receiving account was not mine. That was enough for him. "We revoke the power today," he said. I signed the revocation before leaving his office. He sent formal notice to the lender and both of my banks. Then he looked at me over the top of his glasses and said, "Do you want to know the part people usually get wrong?" "What?" They rush home and demand an explanation. Then everyone deletes messages, changes passwords, and starts remembering a cleaner version of events. You spent your career working from records. Do the same thing now. I drove home feeling less like an angry father than a man stepping into an unfamiliar house in the dark. I wanted to call Elise. I wanted her to say there had been some bizarre mistake, that Grant had used the document without her understanding, that the lender had mixed up accounts. But wanting a fact had never made it true when I assessed property, and it wasn't going to make it true now. The next 3 days turned suspicion into arithmetic. Martin obtained the loan history while I pulled 14 months of statements from every account I owned. The credit line had not deposited money directly into my checking, which explained why I had never seen it in my routine banking. Advances had been sent to an account belonging to Keller Flooring Solutions, Grant's company, and from there, portions moved into a personal account jointly held by Elise and Grant. The loan statements had been paperless from the beginning, sent to an email address created under my name, but controlled from a phone number ending in digits I recognized immediately as Elise's. The lender had mailed one initial disclosure to my home. Martin asked whether I remembered it. I did. Or rather, I remembered something close enough to make me sick. 13 months earlier, Elise had stopped by while I was out mowing and brought my mail inside. She had stayed for dinner. I had never wondered whether one envelope left with her. That was the beauty of trust when someone decided to misuse it. They didn't need to break windows. They could carry the evidence out through the front door while you sliced pie. By the second afternoon, we had matched $43,600 of the borrowed money to Grant's business expenses, including overdue supplier invoices, payroll, and equipment leases. Another $17,900 had gone toward their household mortgage and 2 auto loans. The remainder was scattered among credit cards, travel charges, and cash withdrawals. I asked Martin why they would risk my property rather than ask me for help. He said, "Because asking gives you the right to say no." That sentence stayed with me. I remembered every time Elise had asked over the years. $1,200 when Owen needed dental work, $2,000 when Grant's work truck broke down, tuition for a summer program. I had helped often, but not automatically. I asked questions. I wanted to know what happened. I sometimes said no. Somewhere along the way, apparently, my daughter had decided that my ability to refuse was the problem. On the 3rd day, the lender's investigator found something worse. When Elise applied to open the line, she had provided a letter claiming I was experiencing ongoing cognitive and mobility limitations following cardiac surgery and had delegated financial management to her. The letter was not from my doctor. It looked official, carried the name of a medical practice I recognized, and included a signature from a physician who had treated me once during rehabilitation. Martin called the practice while I sat across from him. The physician had never written it. I felt anger for the first time then. Clean anger, not confusion. My daughter hadn't merely stretched an old permission. Someone had built a story in which I was too diminished to manage my property. The investigator also found a draft document in the lender's file that had never been completed. A proposed transfer of the Dunbar duplex into a limited liability company called EK Holdings. E for Elise, K for Keller. Why would the lender have this? I asked. Martin read the notes twice before answering. Elise had apparently asked whether transferring the property into an LLC would make future refinancing easier. The lender's employee had told her she would need additional authority or my signature. The transfer never happened, but the intention was there in black and white. That evening, I sat alone at my dining room table with a photograph of Linda propped on the bookshelf across from me. I didn't ask the photograph what I should do. Linda hated when people turned the dead into convenient advisors. I knew what she would have said because she had spent 34 years teaching children to check sources before trusting a story. So I checked sources. I called my property manager and had rental deposits redirected to a new operating account at a different bank. I froze the old account except for $73 needed to keep it technically active while the bank investigated several linked transactions. I placed fraud alerts on my credit. I moved original deeds and tax records into Martin's office safe. I changed locks on the rentals. Then, with the lender's cooperation, the line of credit was frozen completely. No more advances, no more transfers. Martin asked if I wanted. Elise informed immediately that the power of attorney had been revoked. Legally, she would receive notice, but delivery could take a few days. How long before the next scheduled advance? I asked. The investigator checked. 9 days. A transfer of $3,260 had been queued for the morning their mortgage payment was due. Martin understood why I was asking. You don't need a trap, Sam. We already have records. I know. I'm not trying to trap her. I want to know what she does when the money stops. He studied me for a moment. Then don't provoke anything. Keep your doors locked. Keep your phone on you. I installed a second porch camera that afternoon, not because I expected violence, but because I had spent too much of my life documenting what stood on the ground instead of what people later claimed had been there. The waiting was harder than the investigation. On day 2, Elise called to ask whether I wanted to come over Sunday for pot roast. She sounded exactly like my daughter. Owen yelled in the background that he had made the soccer team, and for 5 minutes I forgot about liens and forged letters. Then, just before hanging up, Elise said, "Everything okay with your rentals?" I looked at the notebook beside me. Why wouldn't it be? No reason. You mentioned that furnace problem last month. The furnace is fine. She waited half a second. Bank stuff all normal? There it was. As far as I know, I heard Grant say something in the background, too low to understand. Elise ended the call quickly. Day 4, Grant texted me asking whether I had received any unusual notices from the county. I replied that the county sent me notices all the time. He sent a thumbs up and nothing else. Day 6, someone tried twice to log into the old rental account with an outdated password. The bank's security team captured the attempts. Day 7, Elise came by without calling. She brought banana bread. My daughter had not baked banana bread since high school. We sat in the kitchen while she talked about Owen, school schedules, and a neighbor's new fence. She glanced toward the stack of unopened mail beside the microwave 3 times. Finally, she asked, "Did you ever change anything with that power of attorney after your surgery?" I looked directly at her. Why? She tore a piece of banana bread with her fingers, but didn't eat it. I was just cleaning old files. I haven't had surgery in 3 years. I know, Dad. Then it's an odd thing to worry about on a Tuesday afternoon. Her face tightened, then softened again. You always read too much into things. I almost laughed. For 37 years, reading details other people considered too small had been my job. I had found illegal additions from roof angles, unreported finished basements from permit inconsistencies, and boundary errors because one fence post sat 6 inches out of line. There is no such thing as a small detail once it refuses to fit. Elise left after 20 minutes. She hugged me at the door, and that almost broke me. I stood there, smelling the same vanilla hand lotion Linda used to buy her for Christmas, and wished, with the force of a prayer, that the next 2 days would prove I had misunderstood everything. Day 8 remained quiet. At 9:17 that night, Grant called. He skipped small talk. "Sam, did you change banks?" "Which bank?" "Your property bank. Why would you need to know?" He gave a short laugh. "Elise said something about you reorganizing accounts." "Elise said that?" Silence. Then he said, "Forget it. Just checking." At 4:52 the next afternoon, the lender informed Martin that the scheduled $3,260 advance had been blocked. At 6:11, Elise texted, "Call me." At 6:13, "Important." At 6:26, "Did you freeze something?" I did not answer. At 7:02, Grant called twice. At 8:40, Elise left a voicemail saying there was some mix-up affecting our household. That phrase told me more than she intended. Not my household, our household. At 10:15, Martin called to make sure I was home and reminded me not to invite anyone inside if they appeared angry. I slept badly. At 5:32 the next morning, my phone lit up with a porch motion alert. By 5:38, my daughter was pounding on the door. The police arrived 11 minutes after I called. By then, Grant had broken the porch chain plate when he shoved the door a second time, though he never made it fully inside. When he saw the cruiser stop at the curb, the anger went out of his face so quickly it looked like someone had switched off a light. Elise stood beside their SUV with her arms folded, crying now, not loudly but steadily. Officer Lena Martinez spoke to me inside while another officer kept Elise and Grant separated on the lawn. I showed her the footage from both cameras. She watched Grant lean into the door, heard Elise say the credit line had to be restored, heard Grant admit their mortgage depended on the transfer, and heard my daughter tell me the duplex was going to be mine eventually. Officer Martinez asked whether I wanted the damaged doorway documented. I said yes. She asked whether Grant had touched me. I said no. I had no reason to turn a broken chain into an assault that hadn't happened. That mattered to me. By 8 that morning, Martin was at my house with the lender's fraud investigator on speakerphone. Elise had been allowed to leave after giving a statement. Grant received a citation related to the property damage and later faced a separate charge when the investigation expanded. But the real collapse began with their phones and email records. Once the lender filed its fraud referral and detectives obtained the appropriate records, the story became clearer than anything either of them could explain away. Grant's flooring business had begun losing money almost 2 years earlier, after 2 commercial clients failed to pay large invoices. Instead of cutting expenses, he borrowed. When ordinary credit tightened, Elise used my old power of attorney to obtain the line against Dunbar Street. At first, they told each other they would replace every dollar when Grant landed a municipal flooring contract he was bidding on. He didn't get the contract. Then they drew more money to cover the first payments. Their mortgage reset at a higher rate. They drew more. One SUV was leased, then another because Grant claimed he needed a newer vehicle for clients. By the time the balance crossed $40,000, they were no longer talking about temporary help. Their messages showed a different mindset. Dad has 2 rentals and pension income. He doesn't need Dunbar. If we stabilize for another year, we can fix it before he notices. Then came the message that hurt worse than all of them. Grant had written, "Worst case, the properties come to you eventually." Elise replied, "Exactly. We're borrowing against what will be ours." I read those words in Martin's office and felt something close inside me. Not love. Love is stubborn. Something else closed. The part of me that kept searching for a version of the story where my daughter had made one desperate mistake. The detectives also traced the false medical letter. Grant had created the template using information from an old rehabilitation summary Elise had access to. Elise had supplied the physician's name and my surgery dates. Neither could blame the other completely. They had built it together. The attempted LLC transfer was their next step. If the lender had accepted it, they planned to move the duplex into a company they controlled, refinance at a higher amount, pay off Grant's business debt, and continue servicing the loan with rent from my tenants. In their minds, I would still receive income, so they convinced themselves I wasn't truly losing anything. That rationalization fascinated and disgusted me. People rarely announce to themselves that they are becoming thieves. They rename the thing, borrowing, using equity, keeping money in the family, taking an advance, protecting what will eventually belong to us. By the time the words catch up with the act, they may have crossed a dozen lines. 2 weeks after the porch confrontation, Elise asked through Martin if she could speak with me. I agreed to a meeting in his conference room. She looked exhausted when she came in. Grant was not with her. She sat across from me and said, "Dad, I never wanted to take your building. You prepared paperwork to move it into your company, only because the lender said it would make things easier. Easier for whom?" She looked down. "We were drowning. Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have said no." There it was again. The cleanest truth in the whole story. That was my right. Her eyes filled. "You helped me my whole life. Helping you was my choice. You removed the choice." She whispered, "Mom would have helped us." For the first time that morning, I felt angry enough to raise my voice. But I didn't. "Do not use your mother to sign a document she never saw." Elise flinched. I leaned back and let the silence stay where it belonged. Finally, she said, "Are you going to send me to prison? I'm not the prosecutor. You know what I mean." "No, sweetheart. I know what you want me to mean. You want me to fix what happens next. I spent your whole childhood fixing what I could. Flat tires, tuition gaps, broken air conditioners, bad landlords. When your mother got sick, I tried to fix that too, and I learned there are things a father cannot fix no matter how much he loves his family. This is one of them." She cried then, and I cried with her. But I did not withdraw my statement, and I did not ask anyone to overlook the evidence. 7 months later, Elise stood before a judge and admitted that she had used my power of attorney for transactions I had never authorized, helped submit false documentation to obtain credit against my property, and participated in moving the borrowed funds for her household's benefit. Grant entered his own plea separately for his role in preparing the false medical document, using the proceeds through his business, and damaging my door during the confrontation. The lender absorbed part of the disputed balance while pursuing recovery, but the court ordered restitution for fees, losses, and funds that could be directly attributed to them. Elise received 12 months in county custody, with part of the term suspended after completion of a financial crimes program, followed by 4 years of supervision and a prohibition on acting under anyone else's financial power of attorney during that period. Grant served a shorter jail sentence, but received longer financial restrictions connected to his business. Keller Flooring folded before the case ended. They sold both SUVs. Their house did not vanish overnight, but they had to refinance, cut expenses, and eventually move into a smaller place. Elise and Grant separated during the investigation. Owen stayed with his father's sister for several weeks while everything was unstable, and that was the consequence I hated most, because he had done nothing wrong. I paid his school expenses directly to the school, not through either parent. That distinction mattered. Loving my grandson did not require pretending his parents had done nothing. About a year after the morning on my porch, Elise and I met for breakfast at a diner near Westerville. She was working again, keeping books for a small veterinary clinic under supervision that prevented her from handling certain accounts. She looked older. So did I. We talked about Owen's baseball team, Linda's old recipe cards, and whether the maple in my backyard needed trimming. Eventually, Elise said, "I used to think you were punishing me when you asked questions about money." I stirred my coffee. I was asking questions because money has edges. She smiled faintly. That sounds like something an assessor would say. Everything has edges. I looked through the window at the parking lot, where 2 neighboring businesses had painted separate lines around their spaces. For 37 years, people came into my office furious about boundaries. A fence was 2 feet over. A driveway crossed a parcel line. Someone planted a shed where it didn't belong. Half the time, the person crossing the line would say the same thing. Nobody was using that part. Or, "We've always treated it like ours." They thought use created ownership. Elise looked down at her hands. "That's what I did." "Yes." She nodded. She didn't ask me to forgive her. That helped more than if she had. A few months later, I let her come to my house for Owen's birthday dinner. She brought a store-bought cake and asked before putting leftovers in my refrigerator, which made us both laugh because the question was so unnecessarily careful. Trust does not return in one dramatic moment. It returns in small, ordinary permissions that can be withdrawn without war. The Dunbar duplex is still mine. I paid off the disputed portion of the lien while the restitution process sorted out what was owed, then recorded the release personally. The first time I saw the county database show the property clear again, I sat at my desk longer than I expected. That building was never really the point. Neither were the $73 I left in the old account, or the $3,260 that failed to reach my daughter's household that Thursday morning. The point was the line I had allowed love to blur. I had spent most of my adult life telling strangers exactly where one person's property ended and another person's began. Yet I had almost convinced myself family should not need the same clarity. I know better now. My daughter is still my daughter. My grandson is still my grandson. I will show up when they are sick, celebrate when they succeed, and sit beside them when life hurts. But nobody gets to turn my love into a signature, my age into an excuse, or my future death into a financial plan. A boundary does not mean there is no love on the other side. Sometimes the boundary is the only reason love has a chance to survive.